Single mom falls asleep on a stranger's shoulder, then learns he's a billionaire offering her everything. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The crying broke through the cabin like an unwelcome siren, sharp and impossible to ignore. Several passengers turned with visible annoyance, their glances sharp, impatient. Sierra Maddox held her 6-month-old daughter tightly against her chest. Rocking her gently and whispering soft words meant more for comfort than effect. The overnight flight from Seattle to Savannah had been the only option she could afford, purchased in a rush with the last of her savings. She hadn't wanted to travel like this, not with a baby and barely enough to get by, but her sister's wedding was in 2 days. And even after everything between them, Sierra felt she had to be there. At 23, her features still bore the outline of youth, but the fatigue that clung to her eyes and shoulders made it clear she'd lived too much too fast. The father of her child had vanished the moment she told him she was pregnant, leaving her to raise Rowan alone in a rundown studio apartment on the edge of Seattle. Each day had become a calculation: diapers or groceries, power bill or baby formula. The murmurs around her grew louder. A flight attendant with tired eyes and a clipped tone leaned down and told her flatly to please control the baby. A man across the aisle grumbled something about how she should have thought twice before flying. Sierra bit her tongue, swallowed. Her pride, and was already rising with Rowan in her arms, prepared to retreat to the bathroom in shame, when a voice beside her interrupted, calm and direct. "If you don't mind, may I try something?" She turned and found herself looking into the eyes of a man dressed in a perfectly cut navy suit, his dark hair neat, his posture composed. His pale blue eyes held a calm that cut through the tension. In the air, everything about him spoke of control, of success, of a life untouched by the chaos of crying babies in cramped seats. He didn't look like someone who belonged in economy, and yet there he was, offering to help. "I've got 3 nephews," he said with a quiet smile. "Learned a few tricks over time." Sierra hesitated. Her instincts, sharpened by months of hardship, warned her not to trust easily, especially not men who offered help too quickly. But there was something in his voice, in the effortless ease of his offer, that didn't set off any alarms. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was desperation, but in that moment she needed a break. Her arms trembled as she handed over Rowan. The change was instant. The baby nestled into his shoulder, let out a soft sigh and stilled. The tension in the cabin dropped with her cries. Relief settled over them all like a quiet fog. The man began to hum, low and steady, while rubbing the baby's back in. Slow, practiced circles. Sierra watched him in silence, her eyes burning with unshed tears. The feeling of being seen, supported, even for a moment, felt almost foreign. "I'm Sierra," she said softly, a grateful smile tugging at her lips. "And this is Rowan." He nodded, not missing a beat in his rhythm. "Grant, nice to meet you both." She filed the name away, along with the strange warmth in her chest. Their conversation unfolded naturally after that. Sierra explained carefully that she was a single mom working at a diner, that the flight was both a family obligation and a difficult emotional step. Grant didn't offer solutions. He didn't interrupt or try to fix anything. He just listened, really listened. When she finished, he said, "You're stronger than you think. Not everyone could handle all of this alone." The words weren't patronizing. They settled into her like something solid. She leaned back in her seat and, for the first time in days, allowed herself to rest. Grant offered to hold Rowan while she napped. Sierra declined politely, but her body betrayed her. Her limbs ached, her eyelids burned, and she couldn't fight sleep any longer. So she gave in. rested her head on the shoulder of a stranger, and drifted into a sleep deeper than any she'd had in weeks. The rhythmic hum of the plane, the warmth of another adult nearby, the steady breath of her daughter, it all wrapped around her like a temporary home. When she woke up, the cabin lights were on, and the descent had begun. Rowan was still cradled in Grant's arms, dozing peacefully while he softly hummed the same lullaby. Sierra blinked, sat up, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry. I can't believe. I fell asleep like that. That must have been completely inappropriate." But he just smiled. "You needed the rest. She's fine." She took Rowan back, slow and gentle, but missed the warmth the moment it left her arms. There was something about him that didn't fit in that cramped cabin. Not just the tailored suit or the calm demeanor, but the way he looked at her without judgment. When she asked what he did for work, Grant replied simply, "I run social initiatives." He didn't elaborate, said that flying coach from time to time helped him stay grounded, reminded him what mattered. It sounded strange, too polished, but she didn't press. Their conversation faded into the sounds of landing announcements and rustling baggage, but the thread between them didn't snap. As they disembarked, he handed her a sleek business card. "If you ever need anything, give me a call." She barely glanced at it then. Her arms were full, her body running on fumes. But later, at the budget motel she'd booked near the wedding venue, after Rowan was fed and sleeping, she finally looked. The name stared back at her. Grant Ashford, CEO, Ashford Foundation. It hit her like a jolt. She had fallen asleep on the shoulder of one of the most powerful men in the country and told him her whole life story without knowing who he really was. The motel Sierra had booked was tucked into a quiet corner on the outskirts of Savannah, not far from the event center where her sister's wedding would take place. It was small, outdated, and carried online reviews that used words like adequate and questionable. But it was all she could afford. The heating unit rattled every time she tried to turn it on, and the bedspread smelled faintly of air freshener layered over years of wear. Sierra set up the portable crib she had packed for Rowan and sat down on the edge of the mattress to catch her breath. Her mind kept circling back to Grant, the way he had held her daughter with confidence, the way he had listened without judgment, the way his calm had made her forget, even briefly, how tired she was. He felt like someone from another world, and yet he had been the only person in months to offer help without expecting anything in return. Later in the afternoon, while she wrestled with the wrinkles in one of the only semi-decent dresses she'd brought for the wedding events, her phone vibrated with a message she hadn't expected. It was from her sister Nora. "Rehearsal dinner's at 8. Are you coming?" Sierra stared at the screen for a moment before typing back a short reply. "Yes, we'll be there." She didn't mention the exhaustion, the musty motel room, or the uneasy tension of facing her family again. Things with Nora had unraveled the moment Sierra announced her pregnancy. Her sister, always practical and painfully direct, had deemed her decisions reckless. Nearly 2 years of silence had followed, and the wedding invitation had felt more like an obligation than a gesture of affection. But Sierra had come anyway, for Rowan's sake, if nothing else. Her daughter deserved to know where she came from, even if it meant enduring the stares. The rehearsal dinner was being held at a high-end restaurant downtown, rented out just for the occasion. Sierra arrived right on time, dressed in the navy blue dress she had tried and failed to press. Rowan slept against her shoulder, wrapped in a light blanket. Inside, small groups of guests were already sipping drinks and exchanging polite smiles. As Sierra stepped in, a few people turned to look at her. Some seemed surprised, others quickly averted their eyes. Nora approached with a swift, formal kiss on the cheek. "I'm glad you came." Sierra gave a polite smile in return, but inside, she felt like an intruder. She found a seat near the back and asked for a glass of water. She had no intention of drawing attention to herself, but that didn't stop the murmurs from reaching her ears. Roughly 20 minutes later, a ripple moved through the room. Someone important had just arrived. Sierra followed the shift in glances and froze. Grant Ashford had just walked through the door, every inch as polished as he had been. On the plane, moving with quiet confidence. He approached the bride first. Nora greeted him with a familiarity that sent a wave of confusion crashing over Sierra. They spoke briefly, exchanged smiles, and then, without hesitation, Grant turned and walked directly toward the back, toward her. Sierra sat up straighter, her pulse suddenly racing. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice calm, his expression warm. She nodded, unsure of what was happening. "Nora and I go way back," he explained, lowering himself into the chair across from her. "I had no idea you two were sisters. Small world, huh?" The revelation hit hard. What had seemed like an incredible coincidence now felt too strange to ignore, almost like fate nudging her out of place. Grant didn't bring up the flight. He didn't mention how she had slept on his shoulder or how her daughter had curled up peacefully in his arms. Instead, he smiled down at Rowan, still sleeping soundly, and asked how Sierra was finding Savannah so far. Their conversation was short, but every word felt layered, as though more was being said between the lines. When the dinner wound down, he stood and gently touched her hand before leaving. "I hope I'll see you at the wedding." Sierra remained, seated, staring at the space he had just vacated. She had far more questions than answers now, and the growing sense that whatever had started at 30,000 feet was far from over. The morning of the wedding began under a blanket of heavy gray clouds stretching over Savannah. Sierra was awake before her alarm buzzed. Rowan was still curled up in the center of the bed, breathing softly, her tiny fists resting near her face. Sierra took the moment of calm to shower without rush, letting the water run over her shoulders as she tried to organize the mess of thoughts in her head. Grant's appearance at the rehearsal dinner the night before hadn't left her mind for a second. The revelation that he was an old friend of her sister's only made things more complicated. She had spent the past few years convincing herself that good coincidences weren't meant for people like her. And yet there he was, and more than that, he seemed genuinely interested. She didn't know what to expect from the wedding, only that she wasn't ready to be invisible anymore. "Not today. Around 10 a.m., Nora sent a short text. "Can you come early? We could use an extra hand for last-minute things." It could have been a small gesture toward reconnection, but Sierra tried not to read too much into it. She dressed, with the same care as the night before, and gently slipped Rowan into a white dress with lavender accents. A gift from the neighbor back in Seattle, who sometimes watched the baby while Sierra worked. When she arrived at the small chapel where the ceremony would take place, the space was already buzzing with movement. Family members she didn't recognize moved about with purpose. Some offered reserved greetings. Others looked without speaking. The bride, impeccable in a lace gown and tight chignon, spotted her and approached with a short hug and a practical tone. "Glad you made it. We need help tying the flower girl's ribbons. Can you handle that?" Sierra nodded and got to work. It wasn't the time or place for old grudges. The ceremony began exactly on time. Sierra took a seat to the side, not too far back but out of the main view, where Rowan could see the altar from her mother's lap. The little girl stared wide-eyed at the flowers and soft music, fascinated by the colors and voices. Sierra tried to focus on the vows being exchanged, but her eyes drifted across the rows of guests until they landed on him again. Grant was sitting near the back, alone, his attention fixed on the ceremony but alert to everything around him. When their eyes met, he smiled, and something inside her let go. She returned the smile gently, then looked away, heart pounding. She didn't know if she wanted him to come over or disappear completely, but the fact that he was there, again, was impossible to ignore. After the ceremony, guests moved to the reception hall next door. Sierra lingered behind, stopping in the restroom to change Rowan's diaper and touch up her makeup. By the time she reached the hall, the room was alive with chatter, soft music and the clink of glasses. Servers passed between tables, dressed in light-colored linens and floral centerpieces. Sierra scanned for an out-of-the-way table and sat down quietly, not eager to stand out. But it didn't take long for a familiar voice to approach. Grant, hands in his pockets and that familiar quiet smile on his face, asked if he could join her. "The seat's open," she replied, gesturing. "Go ahead." "Oh." He pulled the chair out slowly and sat beside her as if time had no urgency. Sierra didn't know how to start, but he spared her the effort. "I didn't want to make you uncomfortable last night. If you'd rather I sit somewhere else." "You didn't make me uncomfortable," she said, eyes fixed on her water glass. "It was just unexpected." Grant nodded, respecting the space her pause demanded. A few minutes passed before Rowan stirred. Grant offered to hold her, and Sierra, to her own surprise, let him. Rowan reached up curiously, grabbing at his tie with small fingers, making him laugh. The ease with which he handled the baby caught Sierra off guard. She watched in silence, trying to understand what it was that this man saw in her. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "It felt strange seeing you there, with my family. For a second I thought, maybe I made too much of everything that happened on that flight." She looked down, then slowly met his gaze again. "You seemed so at home with everyone, and I didn't know what to think anymore." Grant's expression remained soft. "I was surprised too. But I haven't stopped thinking about you since that night. When I realized you were Nora's sister, it made sense somehow. Being here today only confirmed what I already felt. I wanted to see you again." The way he said it, simply, without pressure, stirred something deep in Sierra. She wasn't sure she was ready for what that meant, but a part of her, the part that was exhausted from running, wanted to hear more. Before she could say anything else, Nora approached to announce that dessert was being served. Grant stood with a nod, promising to come back and say goodbye before he left. Sierra remained seated for a while, Rowan resting in her lap, letting the entire moment sink in. The surprise, the glances, the calm way he stepped back into her life. By the time she left the reception with her daughter asleep in her arms, she still didn't know if the brief reunion meant anything. But she couldn't get Grant out of her head. Back in her motel room, she pulled out the business card he had given her. She still wasn't sure she'd call, but she hadn't thrown it away either. Sierra woke to the soft rustling of Rowan shifting in the portable crib beside the bed. Late morning light filtered weakly through the thin motel curtains, casting a muted glow over the modest room where they were staying. The wedding had passed like a whirlwind. A blur of music, unfamiliar faces and rehearsed smiles. Bits of the ceremony still flickered in her memory. Nora's dress, the stares from relatives, the buzz of conversations she wasn't part of. But above all, it was Grant she kept replaying in her mind. His quiet smile, the way he had held her daughter so naturally, the tension in their conversation that never quite found resolution. She had barely slept, turning everything over in her head. She couldn't tell if she was confused or just afraid. She picked up her phone and checked. No messages. Not from her sister. Not from him. Later that afternoon, Sierra tried to distract herself with simple errands. She went out to grab something ready-made for dinner, walked a few blocks with Rowan tucked in her arms, and stopped at a bakery that looked warm and welcoming. Still, her thoughts kept drifting. She avoided looking at the business card buried at the bottom of her purse. Couldn't decide if she should call him or forget it ever happened. Grant was unlike anyone she'd ever met. Kind without being overbearing, present without offering promises. And that in itself was disarming. She had grown used to men who either vanished quickly or showed interest with strings attached. Grant didn't fit either mold, and maybe that was what unsettled her most. By early evening, back in the room, Sierra tried to keep Rowan entertained with one of the few toys she'd managed to pack. The baby was calmer than usual, which eased a bit of the ever-present guilt Sierra carried. Once she was asleep, Sierra made herself a cup of tea and sat at the edge of the bed. The television murmured in the background, set low, just enough to fill the uncomfortable quiet. Her thoughts wandered to everything she had left behind in Seattle, the unpaid bills, the suffocating routine, and everything ahead that still felt uncertain. When a knock came at the door, she assumed it was a mistake, maybe the front desk, maybe housekeeping. But when she checked the peephole, her heart skipped. It was Nora. She opened the door slowly. Her sister was in casual clothes, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. "Can I come in?" Sierra nodded silently, too surprised to say anything. Nora stepped inside, glanced around the cramped space, and sat on the only chair in the room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nora broke the silence, her voice unsure. "This might sound weird, but Grant came to see me today." Sierra looked up sharply. "What?" Nora nodded. "He stopped by the hotel earlier, said he couldn't stop thinking about you two after the wedding. Asked if I knew where you were staying." Sierra's brow furrowed. "Why didn't he talk to me himself?" "Because he didn't have your number," Nora replied plainly. "And he said he didn't want to pressure you, thought you might need space, but he didn't want to leave without trying." Sierra folded her arms, trying to make sense of it. She felt exposed, but also curious. "So why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw how he looked at you at the dinner, and I saw how you looked back. I know we haven't really talked in a long time, but I felt like I had to tell you." Sierra looked down. Suddenly, the room felt too small. "Did he say anything else?" "Just that your conversation stayed with him, that you seemed like someone carrying too much alone, and that if you were willing to talk, he'd be in the garden at the Whitmore House Hotel until 9. Nora stood up. "He didn't ask me to convince you. He just said that and left." At the door, she paused. "Sometimes what we really need is someone who's actually ready to listen." Once alone again, Sierra looked over at Rowan, sleeping peacefully. The room was still, but her thoughts weren't. For the first time in a long time, maybe, just maybe, the next step could be hers to choose. Not out of guilt, not out of fear, just because she wanted to. The clock on the nightstand read 8:20 when Sierra finally stood up. She had been sitting in the same spot for nearly 40 minutes, staring at the strap of her purse where Grant's card was tucked away. Rowan slept soundly in the crib, arms stretched above her head, her breathing slow and steady. Her daughter's peace stood in stark contrast to the storm gathering inside Sierra. She had less than 40 minutes to decide whether to walk down to the garden Nora had mentioned, or to let this moment pass quietly. It wasn't drama that held her back, not this time, just fear. The kind of fear that crept in when someone like Grant Ashford looked at someone like her as if she mattered. She wasn't used to being the reason anyone waited. She took a quick shower, tied her hair back, and slipped into the only dress she hadn't worn yet, a dark green one with buttons down the front and a light, breathable fabric. Simple, but flattering. Rowan was already awake by then, and Sierra couldn't bring herself to leave her behind. She picked her up gently, draped a soft blanket around her, and headed downstairs without knowing if she'd stay for more than 5 minutes. "We're just going to hear what he has to say," she whispered, mostly to herself. She took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. When she reached the garden of the Whitmore House Hotel, the space was nearly empty. String lights hung from the trees, swaying lightly in the breeze. A small fountain bubbled in the center, and wooden benches were spaced among trimmed bushes and blooming flowers. Grant was sitting on one of them, his back turned to the entrance. For a second, she considered turning around and pretending she hadn't seen him, but there was something about the way he sat, still, thoughtful, watching the water, that made her move forward. She stopped a few steps behind and said his name. Grant turned immediately. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. Sierra shrugged. "I almost didn't, but I don't like leaving conversations unfinished." He nodded and gestured toward the seat beside him. The bench was wide enough to leave space between them, and she appreciated that. She didn't want to seem too open. "Thank you for being here," he began. "I know I should have reached out to you directly, but I didn't want to cross a line. I couldn't leave without at least trying." Sierra looked at him more closely. There was no performance in his body language, no rehearsed words. "I guess I'm trying to understand why. What exactly did you see in me? It was one flight, a conversation, a dinner with strangers. That doesn't sound like something that changes anyone's life." Grant smiled. Not amused, but sincere. "Maybe because you have no idea what you bring with you. A lot of people pass through my life trying to show strength, status, or interest. You didn't try anything. You were just yourself. And that's not as common as it should be." Sierra took a slow breath. It wasn't the answer she expected, and for that reason she didn't know how to answer. "I don't have anything to offer you," she said quietly. "I don't have stability or a life that's figured out. What I do have is a daughter, a job that barely covers my bills, and a constant fear that everything could fall apart." Grant turned to her fully. "And yet, you got up, came here and listened. That says more about you than any resume ever could." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It felt like they had finally found the same rhythm. Sierra felt her shoulders loosen, her thoughts slow. The doubts were still there, sure, but for the first time they didn't feel like walls. Grant leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I'm not here to promise you anything. I'm not offering a fix. I just want you to know there's someone willing to get to know the real you. No rush, no labels." Sierra watched him for a few seconds before replying. "I might need time, but I don't want to close that door." Grant's smile was soft. "Neither do I." They sat like that a little longer, saying nothing and not needing to. When Sierra finally stood to leave, he walked her to the hotel entrance. There was no kiss, no dramatic moment, just a steady gaze and a quiet "good night" that felt more like a beginning than an ending. Back in the elevator, holding Rowan against her chest, Sierra realized that the fear was still there. But now, something else had joined it. A quiet curiosity about where this might go. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to find out. Sierra spent Sunday in Savannah mostly inside the motel room. The city felt unusually quiet, almost as if it respected her need for stillness. She walked down to the corner market for some fruit and bread, exchanged a polite smile with the receptionist, and spent the rest of the morning on the floor with Rowan, stacking soft blocks and watching her giggle. She tried to stay distracted, but the memory of her conversation with Grant lingered like something half said, half felt. He hadn't promised anything. He hadn't mapped out any future. He had just shown up fully and listened. That alone was almost too much to believe. She kept asking herself if she had the courage to let him come closer. She didn't have an answer yet, but she didn't want to shut the door either, not when it finally felt like one was open. That evening, as she was laying Rowan down for the night, her phone vibrated with a short message. It was from Nora. "He hasn't stopped smiling since yesterday." Sierra bit her lip, unsure how to respond. She typed and erased a dozen replies before settling on something simple. "I've been thinking a lot too." Nora didn't press. Further, Sierra put the phone down and watched her daughter sleep, her tiny fists curled like little shells, her breathing light and even. Everything about her reminded Sierra of why she kept trying, even when she was exhausted. She lay down beside her quietly and closed her eyes. There were no grand decisions that night, just a quiet thread of hope beginning to form. And Sierra knew enough to recognize when something real was starting to grow. The next morning, a new message came in, this time from Grant. "Would you and Rowan like to go for a walk today?" Sierra hesitated before answering. She stared at the screen longer than she needed to, then finally typed, "Sure, when and where?" He suggested meeting at Forsyth Park, one of Savannah's most beloved green spaces. Sierra arrived early, pushing the stroller slowly down the shaded paths, trying to look more composed than she felt. Grant appeared minutes later carrying 2 coffees and wearing dark jeans and a pale button-down, a far cry from the crisp suit she remembered. When he saw them, he crouched down to say hello to Rowan first, making the baby laugh with a silly face. Then he looked at Sierra. "I'm really glad you came." They walked with no urgency. The conversation stayed light at first. Favorite spots in the city, stories from his childhood, a funny misunderstanding at a gas station once. Sierra listened closely, trying to fit the pieces of him together. He had always seemed so far removed from her world. But the more he spoke, the more she saw how human he was. He talked about his mom, the pressure he'd felt growing up, the mistakes he'd made. Grant didn't try to sound impressive. He didn't posture or perform, and Sierra found herself starting to trust that. Eventually, they sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree while Rowan slept in the stroller beside them. Grant turned toward her, his voice softer now. "I don't want to push you. I just want to be around if you'll let me." Sierra took a deep breath before replying. "I'm not sure I know what to do with that. Someone like you, being this close without an angle. I've spent years bracing for the worst." Grant nodded gently. "You don't have to do anything right now. I just want you to know I'm here, and I really like being with you. Both of you." The way he said both didn't go unnoticed. Something tugged in Sierra's chest, but it wasn't fear. It felt more like relief, like being seen without needing to explain yourself. They stayed there a little while longer, not saying much, just breathing in the quiet. As the sun began to sink behind the trees, Grant offered to walk them back to the motel. Sierra agreed. The stroll back was quiet but full, the kind of silence that spoke without needing words. When they reached the entrance, she turned to him, unsure of what to say. But he didn't force the moment. He just smiled, gave a small wave to Rowan and said, "Let me know if you ever want to do this again." Sierra nodded, her heart steady in her chest for the first time in days. As she carried Rowan up the stairs and back into their room, she realized something. There was still fear. But now, something stronger was growing beside it, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do this alone anymore. Sierra woke early Tuesday morning with a feeling she couldn't name. It wasn't anxiety, but it wasn't calm either. The memory of her walk with Grant still lingered in her thoughts, like a quiet breeze. After so long trapped in survival mode, the idea of walking beside someone, just being there, felt almost unreal. Rowan was still fast asleep, arms tucked close to her chest, worn out from the day before. Sierra sipped her coffee by the window, staring out at the cloudy Savannah sky, when her phone buzzed with a new message from Grant. "Can I invite you to something? I've got an idea." She didn't respond right away. It wasn't disinterest. It was the weight of what that invitation might mean. It felt like a step forward, and she wasn't used to steps. Eventually she typed, "What kind of idea?" His reply came quickly. "Easier to explain in person. Can I stop by?" Half an hour later, Grant appeared in the motel lobby, hands in his pockets, a look on his face that mixed anticipation and gentleness. Sierra came down with Rowan in the stroller, ready for anything, except what he said next. "You mentioned, you're not sure how long you'll stay," he began. "I have an apartment here in Savannah I'm not using. It's small, nothing fancy, but it's fully set up, close to everything. If it could help you and Rowan, I'd be happy for you to use it. No pressure, just if it makes things easier." Sierra stood still for a few seconds, absorbing the offer. His generosity came with no strings, which only made it harder to accept. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," he replied. "Just think about it." Later that morning, she agreed to see the place. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an older building, with wide windows, a functional kitchen, and a warm, lived-in atmosphere that didn't feel sterile or staged. It wasn't luxurious, but it had a kind of peace to it, like it had quietly held other people's hopes before hers. Sierra stood in the middle of the living room and imagined Rowan playing on the rug. That image alone stirred something in her. Grant must have sensed it, because he said, "Stay as long as you need. If you decide to leave tomorrow, that's okay too." She didn't answer, just nodded. On the way back to the motel, it was Nora who gave the final nudge. "You'll be good here. Rowan will have space, and you'll be able to breathe a little." Sierra didn't respond then, but by late afternoon, she had started packing, quietly, without ceremony. The next day, Nora came by to help with the bags. The two sisters folded clothes and baby blankets together while Rowan napped nearby. There was a new ease between them, something soft that hadn't existed in years. In the middle of the afternoon, Nora looked at her and said, "Why don't you go out with him tonight? I'll stay with Rowan. I'd love some time with my niece." Sierra raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" "Completely. It'll be good for all of us." Deep down, Sierra knew it was more than an offer. It was a gesture of repair, and a chance to be something beyond a mother, a sister, a daughter, just herself. That evening, Sierra met Grant near the riverfront, where strings of lights swayed in the warm air, and the water hummed a steady rhythm against the banks. They walked with no plan, just letting the city wrap around them. He led her to a small terrace restaurant where they dined outdoors under a soft, golden glow. They shared quiet conversations filled with fragments of memories and a few uncertain ideas about what might come next. When they stood to leave, Grant touched her arm, gently, briefly. Sierra turned to face him, her eyes meeting his, and then, as if everything had led to that moment, he kissed her, slow, unhurried. Not a question, just a truth. Sierra didn't pull away. She felt herself melt into it, sure for once that she could trust the feeling. After the kiss, Grant walked her to the door of the apartment. He didn't ask to come, and didn't push for more. He held her hand a little longer and said quietly, "Stay, I'd really like you to stay. I can help you look for work around here. If you want to try, Savannah could be home for a while." Sierra couldn't form a response, but as she stepped inside, the echo of his words still warm in her hand, she already knew what she wanted. And she knew, for the first time in a long time, that she wasn't entirely alone in choosing it. Sierra woke the next morning, unsure how to process what had happened the night before. The kiss with Grant still echoed in her memory, intense, yet calm. It hadn't felt like a mistake or a whim. It was more like the natural continuation of something they had been quietly building. She rose carefully, not wanting to wake Rowan, and moved through the morning with the kind of quiet attention that comes from trying not to stir something too tender. She took a hot shower, then made herself instant coffee using the kettle in the corner. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Grant. "Good morning. Still thinking about last night?" Sierra smiled to herself as she typed back, "Yes, you." The reply came quickly. "Thinking about last night and how I can convince you to stay a little longer." She didn't respond right away. She'd known this question would come. Part of her wanted to say yes, but alongside the hope lived all the other things: doubts, responsibilities, fears she hadn't yet shaken. A little while later, Nora pulled up outside the motel with the car already. Running! Sierra had checked out, her bags waiting next to Rowan's stroller. Her sister helped load everything without saying more than needed. On the drive, Sierra watched the city move past the window, Rowan asleep in a borrowed car seat. When they reached the apartment, the key was already waiting at the front desk, just like Grant had said. The place was bright, furnished simply but with care. As she crossed the threshold holding her daughter, a sense of unexpected calm settled in her. Just the next day, Nora returned, this time with more bags and a different kind of offer. "It's my last day off before I go back to the clinic," she said. "I want to spend the afternoon with Rowan, just the two of us. It'd be good for me." Sierra gave her a long look. "You sure?" Nora smiled. "Absolutely. I want my own memories with her." Sierra understood what she meant. This wasn't just a favor, it was an effort to rebuild something that had been broken for years, maybe longer. With Rowan settled in her aunt's arms, Sierra left the apartment later that afternoon. Grant was waiting across the square, leaning casually against a bike. "Want to ride a little?" he asked, lifting an extra helmet. She laughed. "You seriously want me to get on a bike after years of not even touching one?" He handed her the helmet. "If you fall, I fall too." They cycled slowly through quiet streets and over old bridges, pausing at an overlook where the city seemed to stretch endlessly below them. Sierra sat on the stone ledge, catching her breath. Grant joined her, his tone softer. "If you want to stay, I can help, with work, with childcare, whatever you need. I'm not asking for anything in return. Just think about it." She sat in silence for a long moment, letting the breeze wash over her. "Why are you doing this, Grant?" He didn't answer right away. "Because when I saw you with your daughter on that flight, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. But we did, and every time I see you, it gets harder not to want more. Time near you." Sierra looked away. "I'm not looking to depend on anyone. That's not what I'm offering. I just want to make things easier, if that's what you want." Time stretched between them, heavy with meaning. Sierra finally stood. "Can we head back?" As they walked, Grant pushed his bike with one hand and gently brushed her elbow with the other. She didn't flinch. Her body had stopped reacting with fear around him. When they reached the apartment building, she looked at him with a mix of affection and hesitation. "I need time to think." Grant nodded, no pressure in his smile. "I'll wait." That night, Sierra watched Nora cradle Rowan, telling her a story she was clearly making up as she went. They were both laughing, and something about that scene stirred her deeply. It felt like a glimpse of something real. For the first time, in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to run to survive. Maybe she could stay. Maybe she could build something here. Later, in the dark, after Rowan had fallen asleep, Sierra pulled out her phone and started searching for jobs around Savannah. Translator listings, front desk positions, even a posting at a local library. Nothing certain, but she wasn't looking for an escape anymore. She was looking for a beginning. And when she finally put the phone down, what lingered wasn't fear. It was the pull of something she hadn't felt in years, the desire to stay close to someone who truly saw her. With that thought, she drifted to sleep. The next morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Sierra woke to the sound of Rowan babbling softly in the travel crib near the bed. Everything still felt new in the apartment, but the space carried a kind of peace she hadn't known in a long time. She got up, warmed a bottle, and opened the living room windows to let in the fresh morning air. The light was soft across the hardwood floor, and for the first time in days, Sierra realized she had actually slept well. Her phone buzzed with a message from Grant. "Good morning. Any plans today?" She smiled before replying, "Not sure, yet." The idea that her day could unfold one step at a time was something she was still getting used to. Not long after breakfast, Nora showed up to take Rowan out to a small park nearby. "Take some time for yourself," she said, lifting the baby into her arms with ease, "even if it's just to walk or grab a coffee somewhere." Sierra thanked her, then stood at the door for a few extra moments after they left, unsure what to do with the quiet. It was rare to have a pocket of time that belonged to her alone. She grabbed her bag and stepped outside. She walked slowly through the streets of Savannah, pausing to look at shop windows, listening to scattered conversations from nearby cafes. At one point, she wandered into a bookstore and spent a while flipping through children's books. She didn't buy anything, but left feeling lighter, as if something inside her had unclenched. Early in the afternoon, Grant called. He asked if she was free for lunch. Sierra considered saying no out of habit, but found herself saying yes. He suggested a quiet bistro with outdoor seating under shady trees. When she arrived, Grant was already waiting, his sunglasses folded, on the table beside a chilled bottle of water. He stood to greet her, and they exchanged small smiles, the kind that didn't demand too much. Lunch was simple, light food, light talk. Sierra told him how she and Rowan were adjusting to the new place. He mentioned a few things about work, but didn't dwell. It wasn't a lunch to impress. It was a moment to just be, and that, she was learning, was enough. After they ate, they walked to a nearby square and found an empty bench under a large oak. They sat for a while without speaking. Grant eventually broke the silence. "Being with you makes me wonder why it took me so long to see what really matters." Sierra looked over at him, unsure how to respond. She was still learning how to listen without shutting down. His presence didn't feel intrusive. It felt open and safe, like something she hadn't known she needed. Grant didn't push. He just sat beside her, giving her room to breathe, and she appreciated that more than he could know. By late afternoon, Sierra returned to the apartment to find Rowan asleep in Nora's arms. Her sister didn't say much, but the look in her eyes was full and content. Sierra put away her bag, washed her hands, and joined them on the couch, just watching for a few minutes. The quiet between them wasn't heavy. It was warm. Something had shifted. There was a rhythm forming to this life, not rushed, not forced. For the first time in a long while, Sierra didn't feel like she was chasing something or running from anything. She felt like she might finally be in the right place. Nora left a little while later, saying she wanted to be home when her husband got back, so she could tell him all about her day with the baby. After Rowan was down for the night, Sierra received one last message from Grant. "It was good seeing you today." She replied with a simple smile emoji, then stared at the screen a little longer before turning off the lamp. She didn't want to live in uncertainty anymore, but she was beginning to realize that safety could look different than she thought. Sometimes it came gently, in quiet lunches, thoughtful words, and someone who showed up. And now, she was finally ready to notice. The next morning, Sierra woke to soft light filling the room and the quiet rhythm of Rowan breathing beside her. The night had been peaceful, and her body was beginning to believe that it could rest without guarding every corner of the world. She rose gently, brewed some coffee, put on soft music, and moved through the morning's small tasks with a kind of presence she hadn't felt in years. Her thoughts were no longer about escaping. She was making room for new possibilities. She didn't need to make immediate decisions, but she wanted to be clear-eyed enough to recognize the ones worth choosing. And somewhere in that clarity, she started to admit that Grant might be more than just a kind memory from an improbable encounter. Late in the morning, he called. His voice sounded more grounded than ever. "I wanted to ask you something," he began, I've been thinking about taking you somewhere. It's just outside the city, near the river. My family owns the property, but no one's used it in years. I thought it might be good to see something different, to get out for a bit. Maybe you and Rowan would enjoy it." Sierra listened closely. There was something in his tone that felt deeper than a casual invitation. It sounded like he was offering time, space, peace. "It might be good," she said quietly. The pause on the other end was brief, but meaningful. "Great. I'll come pick you both up." The drive was quiet and easy. Grant drove with calm, a focus, while Rowan slept in the car seat behind them. Sierra watched the scenery pass, then turned her gaze toward him, wondering what exactly he was offering and why. The property was modest, a single-level house with wide windows, surrounded by trees and facing a still stretch of river. No luxury, but everything was clean and tended to, as if waiting. Grant unlocked the door with an old brass key and let her walk in first. She took her time, the wooden floors, the lavender in the air, the soft-toned furniture. It was a house built for peace, and she felt, without effort, that she could belong there. They spent the rest of the day at the house. Rowan was fascinated by the dried flowers in the yard, while Sierra and Grant sat on the porch steps, talking in low tones without rush. He shared pieces of his childhood, the tension with his father, the years spent trying to prove himself. She listened and opened up too, about the fear of repeating old mistakes, the exhaustion of always needing to defend herself. He didn't interrupt or offer fixes. He just listened, with his eyes, with his posture, as if each word from her was something rare. When she finally stopped speaking, he didn't say anything. He simply touched her hand, and she looked at him differently, like someone she could actually want beside her. As sunset approached, Sierra stepped out onto the porch and found Grant, leaning against the wooden railing, watching the slow current of the river. The sun cast golden glints across the surface, and she stood behind him for a moment, breathing the same air, taking it all in. When he turned around and saw her, his expression softened. He waited until she came closer before speaking, his voice steady and low. "Sierra, I need to say something as clearly as I can." She looked at him, focused. He went on. "I can't picture my life without you anymore. From the first moment I saw you, on that plane, then at the wedding, something shifted. And after these days, with Rowan, with you, I don't want this to end. Have you thought about staying in Savannah? Being near your sister, your family? Me?" He stepped a little closer. "I want to be with you. I want to help, if a fresh start is something you're open to. Not out of pity, not as a favor, but because I care. Because your happiness matters. To me. Here. With me." Sierra felt her throat tighten. She looked down briefly, gathering herself, then met his eyes again. "I have thought about it, more than you'd guess. But I was afraid I'd be overstepping, like I was asking for something that wasn't mine. But here I feel different, like maybe I can build something new, slowly, with dignity. I want to be near Nora, near the people who matter, and near you." He moved even closer until they were face to face. "You're not overstepping anything. There's space for you here, not just physically. I want you here. I want us to build something real." She didn't pull back. Her hand reached his chest gently, as if confirming he was real. He placed his hand over hers, steady and sure. They stayed like that for a moment, until she leaned forward and kissed him. It was slow, deliberate, deep, an unspoken yes. When their lips parted, her eyes were wet, but she smiled. "I think I already knew my answer before we even got here. I just needed to hear it from you." He rested his forehead against hers, a quiet act of tenderness. "Then stay. We'll figure it out together." The sky had turned a soft blue. By the time they returned inside, Rowan was still asleep, and the house seemed to hold the memory of that moment with rare care. Sierra sat beside the crib, watching her daughter, then glanced at Grant. For once, the future didn't feel like a place filled with threat. It felt like a road slowly forming beneath her feet, and she wouldn't have to walk it alone. 2 years had passed since the day Sierra chose to stay in Savannah. So much had changed. Rowan, now 2.5, ran through the apartment with quick little steps, her voice full of early words and bright curiosity. Grant and Sierra had built a life together, not extravagant but grounded and steady. They lived in a quiet apartment near the park, where they used to take long walks in those first uncertain days. With a recommendation from Grant, Sierra had found a stable job, one that gave her a new sense of purpose. The days were full, but never heavy. Nora, now expecting her first child, spent many afternoons helping her sister plan the wedding. Her partner, warm and reliable, had become close to both Grant and Sierra, naturally blending the two families that had once felt worlds apart. On the wedding day, the weather in Savannah was crisp and clear, the kind of soft sunlight that feels like a blessing. The church had been decorated in white flowers and sprigs of lavender, welcoming guests with quiet beauty. Rowan walked down the aisle first, in a pale dress, holding a small basket of flower petals. She tossed them with charming confusion, drawing smiles from everyone, then ran straight into Grant's arms at the front of the church. He knelt down, embracing her gently. He looked sharp in his suit, but the emotion in his face softened every line. When the music changed, all eyes turned to the entrance. Sierra appeared, wearing a classic gown with delicate lace and a short veil. She walked steadily, her eyes locked on Grant, her expression a calm blend of pride and peace. Every step reflected what she had fought through to arrive at that moment. Grant stood as she approached, his eyes full. When she reached the altar, he took both her hands in his. The officiant spoke slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle gently into the room. Then came the vows. Grant went first. "Sierra, you came into my life when I wasn't looking for anyone, but I couldn't not see you. Your strength, your heart, the way you love Rowan. You changed me. I promise to stand beside you, to be true, to respect you, and to love you fully, for everything you are and everything we'll build together." She held his hands more tightly, her voice steady. "Grant, you showed me that starting over is possible, that trust can grow back, that love can come again. I promise to walk with you, to build something real with you, and to care for this family with everything I have." The words were simple, sincere, no dramatics, just the truth of two people who had lived their way to this day, one hard-earned. Moment at a time, the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and the sound of applause filled the chapel soft and warm. Rowan ran to them just as they kissed, and the three of them wrapped into a quiet embrace at the front of the aisle. A family made not by accident, but by choice. Outside, petals fluttered through the air. Laughter and hugs filled the church courtyard. Sierra glanced back one last time before stepping into the car with Grant and Rowan. This new chapter wasn't the beginning of something uncertain. It was the continuation of a love that had been tested, shaped, and finally celebrated. And on that sunny Sunday in Savannah, their love was recognized, not just by the people around them, but by themselves, and by the life they had chosen to create together. The end. Did you enjoy this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another heartfelt tale. See you next time.